Let me ask you something right off the bat. Do you really believe that most people would do the right thing when no one is looking? Well, I'm going to tell you a story that will shake up everything you think about character, dignity, and the power of a single decision. Get ready, because what happened to Thomas is not only surprising, it's completely counterintuitive. In a world where many lose faith in people, where appearance defines value and kindness seems to be a rare commodity, a homeless man, someone who many won't even look in the eye, found a wallet stuffed with money. Now think about it. What would you do in that situation? Most people would think about surviving, but Thomas chose a different path, a path that almost cost him his freedom, but that also led him to find something infinitely greater. But believe me, what seemed to be a simple act of honesty hid an even darker and more unpredictable plot. Family secrets, betrayal, fear, insecurity, loneliness, and a twist capable of completely transforming his life, and perhaps yours too. If you think you've seen it all, on that sultry afternoon, the sun seemed to pour all its burning weight over the city, as if it wanted to test the resilience of those who there were trying to find some relief. Among the irregular shadows of an old tree, Thomas rested on a wooden bench corroded by time. His belongings, modest and piled up in a worn backpack, made up the scene that for many would be invisible, but for him, it was what was left of his existence. As he watched children running around, couples discussing trivialities and old people feeding pigeons, his eyes for a brief moment fixed on something unusual, a discreet glow hidden under the dry bushes. Curiosity overcame fatigue, and with a slow movement Thomas approached. It was a leather wallet, apparently expensive, like the ones he only saw in shop windows he had never entered. When he opened it, he was overcome by a mixture of surprise and uneasiness. Important documents, cards and a respectable amount of money were there. His heart, racing, fought a silent battle with his conscience. In the world he lived in, that money could be the difference between continuing to breathe or giving in to the loneliness of abandonment. Still, something inside him, a thread of self-love, a remnant of wisdom inherited from better times, whispered firmly, "This belongs to someone. Give it back." As the warm wind swept through the square, Thomas remained there, motionless for long minutes, immersed in a dilemma that would test his understanding of life and his courage in the face of temptation. The voices in his mind created a visceral duel. One told him, "Enjoy it, who would care? After all, no one feels empathy for you." The other, filled with a rare humility, retorted, "Don't betray your own humanity. There is more value in the forgiveness you can grant yourself by doing the right thing." The money seemed to pulse in his hands, as if it were provoking his insecurities and the loneliness accumulated over the years. But Thomas, carrying an honor that the world insisted on ignoring, decided that he would not give in. As in a true adventure of the soul, he would choose the most difficult path, the one paved by honesty, kindness, and the power of goodness, even if it did not earn him any recognition. And that was how, on a simple park bench, a story began that no one would ever imagine. With his wallet carefully kept in his pocket, Thomas began his walk without a clear direction, but with a single goal in mind: to return that asset to its rightful owner. The city, with its busy streets and hurried faces, seemed indifferent to the small act of altruism that was taking place there. As he crossed avenues and corners, sweat dripped, but perseverance gave him strength. He thought about his distant mother, his interrupted childhood, the mistakes he had made, and felt, paradoxically, an inexplicable gratitude for still carrying within him that spark of honesty. As the sun set on the horizon, leaving the sky tinged with orange, Thomas did not know that the true test of his courage was yet to come. And so, while destiny planned new chapters, he continued, without imagining how deeply his journey would touch not only his life, but also the souls of many others. With the weight of his wallet in his pocket and the even greater weight of the decision on his shoulders, Thomas walked through the city streets. The heat, now mixed with the smell of asphalt and fried food, seemed to mock his situation. Every step he took was accompanied by internal voices in a constant struggle between fear and hope. He reread the name printed on his ID dozens of times, as if memorizing a sacred verse, clinging to the only clue he had. However, the lack of a cell phone, internet access, or even someone willing to listen to him made everything more difficult. There, in the middle of that urban chaos, Thomas experienced the true essence of resilience. It was like crossing a desert without knowing if there would be water on the other side, but with the unshakable faith that doing the right thing is a path that always leads to light, even when the path is plunged into the darkness of loneliness and insecurity. At a certain point, his steps took him to the door of a police station. There, standing on the sidewalk, he felt the sweat freeze on his temples. He took a deep breath, trying to gather the courage to go inside. After all, wouldn't that be the most appropriate place to drop off a lost object? However, as he approached, he was greeted with suspicious looks and then with words filled with disdain. "Go away, you bum, this is no place for you." Those phrases cut his soul like razors, rekindling old wounds, memories of a system that so often denied him understanding and respect. Still, even in the face of rejection and injustice, Thomas refused to harbor resentment. He chose the route of kindness and humility, understanding that behind each uniform there were also human beings lost in their own labyrinths of fear, insecurity, and hardness of heart. And he continued, determined, with an almost childlike faith that somewhere, in that city, he would find the owner of the wallet. With every block he walked, temptations whispered. Money could buy him hot meals, a safe night in a cheap boarding house, maybe even new clothes. All he had to do was give in, and for a few hours, the loneliness would lose its power. However, that was where the greatness of his journey lay. Thomas chose to honor his own dignity. He knew that true freedom is not bought with coins, but with the honesty that is practiced in moments when no one is looking. Therein lay the essence of self-love, of silent courage, of trust in one's conscience. And it is precisely in these crucial moments, when everything seems to conspire to make us abandon our principles, that the greatest opportunities for inner growth arise. Without knowing it, Thomas was about to experience something even more intense, where the strength of his perseverance and the depth of his compassion would be brutally tested. With his name engraved in his memory and his wallet kept like a sacred treasure, Thomas plunged into the concrete jungle, driven by a courage that even he didn't know where it came from. The wide streets and narrow alleys seemed to test his determination. At every corner, he began his search in the places where his heart tells him to look first: bank branches, neighborhood grocery stores, small clinics. At each counter, a polite, "Sorry, we don't know this person," greeted him with the coldness of a stranger. But even when faced with these closed doors, Thomas didn't give up. To each refusal, he responded with gratitude for still having the strength to try. His gaze carried the brightness of hope, the firmness of honesty, and the faith of someone who believes that the power of kindness, sooner or later, finds a way out. As he crossed a busy street fair, Thomas stopped for a moment to observe the life pulsating around him. Children ran, vendors shouted their offers, and the smell of fresh fruit mixed with the aroma of fried pastries. There, in the midst of that harmonious confusion, he experienced a moment of profound humanity. Despite everything, the world went on as it should, and he, even on the fringes of society, was part of that great spectacle of life. In that everyday scene, it became clear how rare but precious understanding and empathy are. Many people ignored him, but a few gave him kind looks, as if recognizing, even without knowing, his noble mission. These small gestures were like crumbs of affection, enough to feed his resilience for a few more hours. It was then, when fatigue was beginning to set in and loneliness whispered in his ears, that fate decided to give its first sign. At the bus terminal, amidst suitcases, the noise of engines and announcements on the loudspeaker, Thomas approached a young woman with a photo of her ID in her hands. To his surprise, her eyes widened and, In a choked voice, she said, "He's my father." A mixture of surprise, distrust, and tension hung in the air. Thomas, relieved and moved, held out his wallet with both hands in a gesture of respect and sincerity. But something in her posture, her restless gaze, the way she gripped the wallet with a certain restrained anger, planted a seed of unease in Thomas. What should have been a moment of reconciliation and relief suddenly seemed shrouded in mystery. Little did he know that this meeting would only be the gateway to a tangle of even deeper secrets. Thomas's gesture, full of love, kindness, and hope, deserved at the very least a smile of relief or a sincere "thank you very much." However, what he received was a cold, almost accusatory look. The young woman clutched her wallet to her chest as if she were defending a secret, not as someone recovering a lost possession. "Where did you find this?" she asked in a tense voice, as if she were suspicious of every word. Thomas, with the serenity of someone with a clear conscience, explained what had happened in detail: the park bench, the bushes, the dilemma he had faced when deciding to return it. But as he spoke, he realized that his words did not penetrate the wall of distrust erected in front of him. It was as if, in that young woman's mind, a homeless man could never have acted out of compassion, honesty, or altruism. And there, once again, Thomas experienced firsthand the harshness of a world where appearance still dictates the value of a human being. The young woman remained motionless for a few moments, observing Thomas with a mixture of contempt and fear. Her eyes betrayed an inner uneasiness, something that went beyond the simple fear of someone who finds a lost object. Thomas, with all his humility and understanding, realized that there was more to the story than what was being said. The way she frowned, the way her fingers trembled slightly as she held her wallet, suggested not only insecurity but also guilt, an emotional weight that was difficult to hide. He had seen that kind of tension before, on the streets, between people who carried secrets too heavy to bear alone. Once again, his heart was invaded by a mixture of compassion and sadness. After all, suffering has many faces, and it is not always easy to identify who the real victim is. Even in the face of that unexpected reaction, Thomas maintained his calm demeanor. He knew, with the wisdom acquired on the streets and in life, that acting kindly in the face of others' judgment is an act of courage. He chose not to question the young woman, not out of fear, but out of respect for the mystery that clearly surrounded her. Silence sometimes carries more power than 1,000 arguments. However, something told him that this story was far from over. As the young woman hurried away, almost tripping over her own feet, Thomas remained there with a heavy heart, but firm in the conviction that regardless of the outcome, he had made the right choice. However, little did he know that fate, merciless and full of unexpected twists and turns, was already preparing the next chapter of this intricate adventure. The night arrived with its dark and silent cover, enveloping the city in a blanket of uncertainty. Thomas, exhausted, chose his usual corner under a canopy to try to rest his body and, above all, quiet his mind. The distant noise of cars and the faint glow of streetlights were now his only companions. However, what he didn't know was that even there, in an attempt to find some affection in the cold embrace of dawn, the storm that was forming around his life was about to collapse. Suddenly the silence was broken by the sirens that approached with haste and authority. In a matter of seconds, 2 police officers surrounded him, their expressions full of distrust, as if they were facing a dangerous criminal. The complaint had been made. Thomas was, according to the young woman, a possible suspect in the disappearance of her father. The wallet, previously a symbol of his honesty and altruism, had now become a supposed clue. Inside the police van, as the vehicle moved through the dark streets, Thomas felt his heart race at an unsteady pace. Fear, that old acquaintance, enveloped him like a dense cloud. Cloudy thoughts crowded his head. How did I end up here? Why did my attempt to do the right thing bring me to this place? Still, even in the face of internal commotion, he did not give in to despair. He sought strength in resilience and faith in the memories of his journey. After all, life On the streets had already taught him that true power does not lie in controlling what happens to us, but in remaining calm in the face of adversity. As the police van wound its way through the city, Thomas prayed silently, asking only for justice, understanding, and a ray of hope that could save him from that trap. When he arrived at the police station, he was greeted with heavy looks and silent judgments. Thomas knew that for many there, his appearance was enough proof of his guilt. During the interrogation, however, he maintained his firm and sincere posture. He told his story repeatedly, in detail, with the sincerity of someone who has nothing to hide, but with the humility of someone who no longer expects to be easily believed. As he narrated each step of his journey, from the park bench to the meeting with the young woman, the police, initially suspicious, began to notice something in his speech, an honesty that was difficult to fake. Still, deep down, Thomas felt that this was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that, to his surprise, would begin to emerge in the following investigations, revealing secrets that not even the most experienced investigators would dare to imagine. Hours passed inside that cold, claustrophobic room. The grey walls, illuminated by a pale lamp, seemed to compress the air around Thomas. On the other side of the table, the investigators tried in every way to find contradictions in his account. Repeated questions, subtle changes in wording, veiled insinuations, all to test his steadfastness. However, Thomas's sincerity was like a rock in the midst of the storm. He reported every detail accurately, without hesitation, sustained by unshakable courage. There, more than ever, his honor and honesty shone with a serene strength. Even in the face of suspicion, he maintained the kindness in his speech and the understanding towards those who, deep down, were also trying to do their job. As the hours passed, something began to unsettle the police officers. None of Thomas's versions of events would fall apart. Each description was consistent, each fact confirmed by small clues that emerged during the preliminary check. The place where the wallet was found, the compatible times, the witnesses who saw him wandering the streets. It was then that the investigators decided to broaden the focus of the investigation. They collected images from security cameras near the bus terminal where the encounter with the young woman had occurred. And there, in the grainy recordings, the first pieces of a puzzle much more complex than they had imagined appeared. They saw the young woman walking quickly, looking in all directions before leaving in a hurry with the wallet in her hands. Behavior that, to the trained eyes of the police, sparked a spark of distrust. They called the young woman for a new statement. This time, the air of confidence and control that she had displayed at the beginning was no longer there. Faced with incisive questions, she began to contradict herself. Confusing dates, weak justifications, explanations that could not withstand the weight of the truth. Nervousness took over her posture, and the investigators smelled the characteristic scent of fear. Not innocent fear, but the fear of someone who carries hidden guilt. With each new question, she stumbled over her own words, and the veil of mystery began to tear, exposing something much darker than a simple mistaken accusation. Thomas, who had previously occupied the defendant's bench, now watched in silence as the turnaround unfolded, feeling deep in his chest the first spark of hope rekindle. As the days went by, the veil of mystery was gradually torn away by the steady hands of the investigation. It was discovered that the owner of the wallet, a respected businessman in the city, had been missing for exactly 3 days, precisely the same time that his daughter had shown increasingly erratic behavior. Bank documents revealed astronomical debts with loan sharks, loan agreements signed in haste, and a financial desperation that bordered on collapse. There, hidden beneath the surface of a seemingly solid family, was revealed a web of secrets, lies and fear. The power of Thomas's kindness in returning that wallet had unknowingly pulled the thread of a ball of yarn much more tangled than anyone could have imagined. Investigators, now armed with this new information, combed through security footage and digital traces until they found a revealing sequence. Images of the young woman leaving a luxury vehicle where her father had last been seen, and, shortly after, sneaking out with her wallet in hand. Confronted with the evidence, she could no longer sustain her lies. In tears, she confessed to having set up the situation, trying to dispel suspicions of her involvement in the disappearance. Her fear, her insecurity, and her desperate attempt to resolve financial problems ended up creating a trap in which Thomas, with his honesty and altruism, was almost swallowed up. The police's understanding finally reached the truth, and Thomas's name was cleared, accompanied by a formal apology. When he received the news of his release, Thomas felt a whirlwind of emotions. There was immense gratitude for being free, relief at no longer carrying the weight of an unjust accusation, but also the shadow of a trauma that would haunt him for a long time. His courage in following the principles of integrity, even in the face of judgment and injustice, now placed him before a new stage in life. However, destiny, with its curious way of working, still had surprises in store for that man who dared to believe in the power of goodness in the midst of a world so marked by interests and distrust. And it was precisely at this turning point that an unexpected chain of events would begin to transform him completely. Thomas's story, marked by his honesty, resilience, and perseverance, quickly caught the attention of the local media. A young reporter, driven by compassion and a sincere desire to bring to light examples of humanity amidst so many daily scandals, decided to look for him. Upon finding him sitting on the same park bench where it all began, the journalist extended his hand with a genuine smile. Thomas, surprised, accepted the conversation, still suspicious, but with the humility of someone who never sought the spotlight. There, under the shade of that tree that had witnessed the beginning of his journey, he told his story. Every detail was filled with sincerity and a silent love for life, even with all its wounds. The interview aired that same night. It quickly went viral on social media, crossing borders and touching thousands of hearts around the world. People, moved by his story of affection, altruism, and forgiveness, mobilized in a powerful wave of kindness and solidarity. Donation campaigns were organized. Humanitarian aid organizations contacted him. A community shelter offered him not only a roof over his head, but a new beginning. For the first time in years, Thomas slept in a soft bed with a warm, clean blanket. Silent tears streamed down his face that night, tears of gratitude, of relief, and of a profound kind of hope, which only those who have been at rock bottom can truly understand. The transformation, however, went far beyond the material. While thousands celebrated his courage, Thomas reflected on the power of kindness and the strength of a seemingly simple decision, but loaded with meaning. His gesture, born of the purest empathy and respect for others, had not only restored his own dignity, but also inspired a multitude to believe in the beauty of small acts. Now, a new adventure began, and what seemed to be just the outcome of an extraordinary story was, in fact, the harbinger of reunions and cures that awaited him, still invisible on the horizon. While his story continued to resonate, reaching newspapers, television programs, and social networks, an attentive and emotional gaze landed on the screen of a small old television set in a simple house on the outskirts of the city. It was the tired gaze of an elderly woman with deep wrinkles that bore years of pain, fear, and longing. There she was, Thomas's mother, who for more than 2 decades believed she had lost her son forever, swallowed up by the clutches of insecurity, loneliness, and the choices that life imposes on those who cannot find an outstretched hand. When she saw Thomas's face in the report, tears welled up immediately. It was as if a piece of his soul, torn apart for years, was finally coming back, together. Hope, the kind that insists on surviving even when everything seems lost, was rekindled with an almost childlike strength. Moved by gratitude and the courage to finally face her own past, the woman contacted the production team of the program that had aired the interview. Within a few days, the reunion was organized. The studio was silent but charged with a sweet, almost sacred tension. When Thomas entered and saw that fragile yet powerful figure waiting for him, his legs wobbled. She looked into his eyes, and for long seconds, no sound was able to bridge the moment. It was not necessary. In that moment, Love, pure, sincere, and absolute, spoke louder than any words. They both cried, embracing each other, in a reconciliation that healed not only the years of separation, but also healed the wounds opened by choices, mistakes, and absences. That hug carried more than longing. In it pulsed empathy, respect, understanding, and an unbreakable force called forgiveness. Everything Thomas had faced, the trial, the danger, the unjust imprisonment, the despair of the streets, now seemed part of a long journey that led him back to where his heart had always belonged. There, in the arms of the mother who had thought he was lost, he found not only the warmth of home, but also the renewed strength to build a different future. And since life, always with its mysterious twists and turns, still had surprises in store, the reunion would be just the foundation for the great turnaround that awaited him just ahead. With the support of his mother, of the people who were moved by his story, and of so many hands extended out of pure altruism, Thomas began a new stage of his journey, a stage marked by hope, wisdom, and the transformative power of love. He was welcomed by a community center that offered shelter, training, and social reintegration for homeless people. There, surrounded by others who, like him, carried deep scars, Thomas discovered a new mission: to be a light in the darkness of others. His story became not only a tale of overcoming, but an instrument of inspiration and reconciliation. He knew, with the clarity that only those who have suffered deeply have, that often the greatest pain of others is not visible. For this reason, he approached them with empathy, offering words of understanding, a listening ear, a gesture of kindness. In his lectures at the center, Thomas shared details of his journey with disarming honesty. He spoke about the fear that paralyzed him under the marquee on that fateful night, about the insecurity that almost made him give up, about the loneliness of the streets and the power of perseverance in moments of despair. But above all, he spoke about the power of kindness, the power that, even though invisible, is capable of reshaping destinies. He mentioned stories he read in the few books he now devoured with a hunger for knowledge, such as Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl and The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. He encouraged everyone to seek not only survival, but meaning. Life only becomes worthy when we decide to be useful, even when no one expects anything from us, he said in a calm but firm voice. Today, Thomas is much more than the man who returned a wallet. He has become a symbol of resilience, of moral courage, of humanity in its purest form. And as he walks through the corridors of the community center with a sincere smile and a serene gaze, he knows that behind every downcast face there is a spark waiting to be rekindled. His story proves that small gestures, those that many consider insignificant, have the gift of initiating the greatest transformations. After all, it was precisely the decision to follow the path of honesty, even in the complete absence of witnesses, that shaped each chapter of this extraordinary adventure. And so, as he continues to touch souls with his affection and his life story, Thomas remains a living example that true greatness is born from the simplest acts. Now tell me, with all sincerity, how many times in your life have you found yourself faced with choices that seemed small, but that deep down carried the weight of great transformations? Would you, like Thomas, have the courage to choose the right thing, even when everything and everyone seems to push you towards the easiest side? The story you have just read is not just about a homeless man. It's about me, about you, about all of us, about how, amidst fear, insecurity, loneliness, and daily temptations, we can still find within ourselves empathy, respect, understanding, and the power of kindness to change our own destiny, and who knows, the destiny of many around us. Now I challenge you, what small gestures have you failed to make? What attitudes of love, compassion, perseverance, and honesty can transform not only your life, but also the lives of those who cross your path? Your story is still being written. The question is, how do you want to be remembered? If this story inspired you, made you reflect, or at least planted a seed of transformation within you, then I invite you to be part of this journey. Subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and stay here with me for more stories that touch, teach, and transform. Together, we will continue to spread what the world needs most: humanity, wisdom, and the true power of kindness.